My name is Zaida Ramazan Asker. I am a senior lawyer in Employment Group within Government Legal Department. I'm also the co-chair of the GLD's Disability and Wellbeing Network, as well as the co-chair of the REACH Senior Disability Network. I am joined today virtually by Stuart Armstrong, who is a response director and disability champion at Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. This is the first of a series of 6 workshops entitled Empowering Disabled People into Senior Grades. The video will be shared by members, with members across the Senior Civil Service REACH Disability Network, as well as civil service widely. And it's hoped that it will benefit people with disabilities who are either in the process of progressing or developing their career, or are considering making that move. I will be asking Stuart a number of questions shortly to discuss about his personal journey and his career development and progress, as well as touching on disability generally. So I'm ready. I've got my questions ready. If you're ready, Stuart.
I am ready and looking forward to it.
Fabulous. So my first question is, can you begin by telling us briefly about your current job and how your career has brought you to this point?
Yes, of course. So at the moment, this is June 2020 when we're filming this, and I'm a response director in the Resilience and Emergencies Directorate in MHCLG, and I'm working on the COVID-19 response. So my job, I'm one of 3 response directors, and my job is to run the Resilience and Emergencies Directorate's Emergency Management Centre, an operational centre, so we can integrate the local response from things like local resilience forums that compose blue light services like the police, fire and ambulance, and of course local authorities, to understand the local picture of what's happening on the COVID response, feed this into the centre, to ministers and senior civil servants, and into the Cabinet Office, and then obviously communicate outwards the direction and priorities to the local tier. So we are putting together an effective response to COVID. I've been doing that since March. My sort of normal day job, I'm the Deputy Director for the MHCLG's International Strategy and Trade team. And there I'm responsible for MHCLG's Transition Readiness Programme for the end of the transition period in December 2020. And I also used to obviously run the former Brexit programme up until it closed in January. So my job is to make sure the department and the stakeholders are ready and capable to exploit all the opportunities from leaving the European Union and to manage any risks. I'm also one of 2 deputy disability champions in MHCLG. And in terms of my journey to those roles, I've been a civil servant for about 15 and a half years. I started as an admin officer, and then I've been promoted since then, including via the fast stream, and I'm now a deputy director. I've worked in 5 departments: the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, HM Revenue and Customs, the Department for International Trade, the Food Standards Agency, and now here. I think in a lot of ways, I'm probably quite a classic generalist. I've done a lot of different things. I've worked in policy, strategy, operations, private office and corporate services. I spent a lot of, probably the first 2/3 of my career focused on national security and serious organised crime, and did a lot of international work. But more recently, I focused on sort of domestic issues. And I live in London, which today is extremely wet and windy. And I'm married to my wife, who's also a civil servant.
Oh, thank you for that. And if I was to ask you to describe yourself, how would you describe yourself?
So I'm very interested in the world and the people who are in the world, and the sort of rich variety that's out there. So I always have a sort of close interest. I've had for many years a close interest in sort of global affairs and understanding what happens in the world, why it happens, what could happen next, and all the sort of variety of people who are out there. I'm very much a sort of an extrovert, so I enjoy the company of other people and understanding sort of where they've come from, what they think, why they think that, and how it can influence communities, nations, and sort of the course of history. I think in terms of, I think I'm a fairly compassionate person and quite people focused. So I am someone who enjoys the company of other people. That's been quite a challenge as we're still in the middle of a lockdown period. So I've been working at home for the last 3 months. And I'm a big dog lover. So I do love going out and having a walk with a dog and doing that. And I think my wife generally says I'm very loud. So yeah, hopefully that paints a bit of a picture of what I'm like.
You mentioned earlier on that you are the Deputy Champion for Disability. What made you become interested in disability rights, and what motivates you to champion the careers of civil servants with disabilities?
Mm-hmm. So I should probably say, first of all, so I have a disability. I've got quite a rare disease. There's only about 300 people in the world who've got this. And essentially it means that my bones are very, very dense and very heavy. And my muscles are generally quite weak, particularly in my legs and in my back. So I am a wheelchair user. I've used a wheelchair now for just over sort of 20 years. So that's my sort of personal lived experience on disability. I think the sort of what first of all got me into wanting to take a sort of active role on this was some personal frustration at barriers that I saw to either my own journey and my own progression and that of colleagues as well. And those barriers are sometimes physical barriers, such as unsuitable buildings and a lack of facilities and adaptations, but also attitudinal barriers by some people who I've worked with and for, about an unwillingness to make adjustments and take some managed risks to support staff with disabilities. So I could see lots of need for change, also lots of good practice, but certainly lots of need for change. I thought, well, I had two choices: either sit there and complain about it or get on and try to change things. I think also as well, I've received quite a lot of support from coaching, mentoring, or people just taking a bit of time to listen to me, to give me advice, to give me some thoughts and opportunities. So I'm very, very keen to use my sort of position to be able to play that forward and offer opportunities to colleagues with disabilities or health conditions to sort of develop themselves in their career. And I think as I've got more senior, I've really sort of seen how it can be really difficult for some people to raise concerns and secure, equal treatment and adjustment. So, one of the reasons I wanted to become a senior civil servant was so I'd have a sort of stronger platform to be able to influence and get things changed for the better.
Fabulous, thank you. You mentioned your medical condition and particularly the fact that it's not a well-known condition. When you meet somebody new, how do you go about raising the subject of the medical condition? Do you wait for it to crop up naturally, or do you raise it? I'm sort of thinking about in the line manager context.
So I am in what I consider to be a fortunate position of I have a sort of very visible disability, so I use a wheelchair. So it's something that people can sort of are instantly sort of aware of. I think for me, my approach has changed over the years. When I first started off, it wasn't something I would proactively really raise with a line manager, either sort of when I was in a job or when I was applying for a job. And I think the main reasons were I thought, well, what should be, what advantages will it be? Will it get me anywhere? Could there be some sort of potential risks? But over the years, I've sort of adopted my approach to that. I think in part, I've become more comfortable with my sort of disability and my sort of understanding of it and how it affects me and what the opportunities and what the sort of disadvantages are. So I'm now more sort of comfortable in my own mind than I was when I started off. What I tend to do now, and what I've done in the last sort of few jobs is when I've gone for the recruitment process, I make use of the guaranteed sort of interview scheme and get the adjustments that I need at an interview. And then when I'm offered a job, I then have a conversation with the line manager around what sort of adjustments I'll need. So for me, it's things like access to a parking space, because I use my car to get into work, because public transport is particularly challenging. And then, so that's a sort of physical adjustment. I've also made use of sort of some adjustments recently about flexing my working week. So I have some, I now don't work Wednesday or Friday afternoons, but I do longer days on Monday, Tuesday and Thursdays. So it gives me some time to rest during the week and to focus on sort of other things. I think my sort of top reflections would be thinking very, developing a sort of script about what I want to say about a disability or a health condition. Different people clearly are comfortable sharing different amounts of information. So I've sort of developed a sort of, this is what I have, this is, what it means, this is what I need to help me work effectively. So yeah, I found that that's worked for me, and I've sort of shared that advice with other people. And I think it's, as the sort of proverbial elephant in the room sometimes, but more and more I try to get on the front foot and just say to people, and I found almost overwhelmingly people go, oh right, okay, that's quite interesting, and then they'll tell me something perhaps either from their own lived experience or that of someone else that they know about it.
Thank you. So in terms of the disability, do you consider yourself to be at a disadvantage, facing problems that need to be overcome and in need of adjustments, or do you see yourself as being more skilled or advantaged because the nature of your condition and maybe because of some coping strategies that you've developed over the course of time? You mentioned you've had this condition for over 20 years. If it's the latter, what would you say is your superpower?
That's a very good question. So I'm going to give that sort of classic fudge answer and say I think it is a bit of both. And sometimes the balance is skewed more in one of another. I think in terms of disadvantages, it certainly makes me a lot more tired than I think the average person in my time is. I'm 39 years old at the time of recording this, so I certainly feel I'm more tired than sort of most people my age. I'm certainly slower to do some things, just physically sort of moving around and sort of taking some tasks. I found that my hands get more tired sort of typing sometimes, so I've started to use some voice activated software to counteract that. So those are some of the negative things. I think also as well, I found at times some attitudinal barriers, perhaps with in some of the jobs that I've had about interacting with someone with a disability. But I think overwhelmingly, I'd say is that I feel that it's I've had a lot of advantages for doing this, because I think it's made me appreciate how the world can look very different to different people. So the world is essentially, the world in the UK is designed essentially for and by white middle class men who work in office jobs. Now I am a white man and I have an office job. Sorry to say able-bodied men. So it's made me see the world from a slightly different perspective. It's made me think very good at problem solving when you think of how can I get into a building when the usual routes are not accessible. I think it's also made me sort of more empathetic than perhaps I may have been had I not had the condition that I've had. And I think it definitely has made me think more about sort of working with and more thoughtful about colleagues from other underrepresented groups. I think there are some common struggles and some common challenges and some common opportunities between groups that are not underrepresented in the civil service and in society. That's it. I think my superpower is I can seemingly eat a very large meal and have quite a lot to drink and never be quite full. So yeah, I've got an enormous capacity for food, apart from sweet corn, which I think is utterly disgusting. But that's probably my big superpower.
I think I've mastered that superpower too. Definitely.
Maybe it's not that super. Maybe everyone's secretly got it. So.
Oh no, it's years in training that I've developed this. So before I go on to ask you some career advice for our members, I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions. Are you ready, Stuart?
I am.
Fabulous. Can you share the best piece of advice that you have received from someone?
Find the best people you can, treat them as well as you can, and learn as much as you can from them.
That's fabulous advice. Now the make or break question: iPhone or Android?
iPhone all the time.
Excellent, fabulous answer. You get brownie points from me for that one. What's your favourite movie?
Oh, that's a good question. I do love films. I think, can I pick two, if that's possible? So I love Casablanca. I think that's a wonderfully acted film, and I often get quite emotional when I hear the French national anthem being sung at Rick's bar. And Platoon, I think, is a fantastic movie as well. I think it's a really honest and very raw description of what it's like to go to war. And it also has some of the best dialogue I think that's ever been written for a film. So yeah, I think it's those two.
Brilliant. I'm really interested in hearing your response to the next question. Describe yourself as a teenager in 3 words.
Lonely, awkward, and questioning, I think.
I think that summarises my 15-year-old too. Over the course of years, we accumulate a number of unwanted gifts. Can you tell me about the best gift that you've ever received?
Wow, that's a good question. That's a very good question. I was given a book many years ago about the Olympics by a senior colleague, and that was something I did some work on the Olympics back in 2012 and on the Paralympics, and that was something that every time I go past it and it's sitting on my bookshelf, it takes me back to one of the sort of happiest times, both in my career, and it was a very interesting bit of work, but also it was the year that I met my wife, and it always reminds me of like a sort of fantastic period, and I think and a period that was a very good one for the United Kingdom when we hosted the Olympics, and that was a sort of fantastic few weeks. So I think that was probably the best present, because it's something that meant a lot to me personally. It reminds me of a lovely, happy time, and every time I see it, it just brings back those sort of very positive memories.
Oh, that's so lovely and uplifting. I think I know the answer to the next question, but I'll ask you anyway. Do you have any pets?
So at the moment, no, but I said I love dogs. So what I try to do is live vicariously through my friend's dog and take it out for a walk as often as possible. And we're hoping to buy a dog in the next few weeks. So I've got my eyes on a Labrador. So that's definitely what I would like.
My children want a cat, and I've been saying no, because I know I will end up looking after it. But I think I'm going to perhaps look into this vicarious looking after a pet next door, and that hopefully will satisfy their quest for a pet and also help me as well at the same time. So that's a good tip for me.
I think that's a good idea. So I think it's the good thing with cats is they can be very well tempted with food. So you can sort of rent one perhaps for a few hours.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And then hand it back at the end of the day. Can you name a book that you have read that positively shaped you?
So I think, yes, there was a book called A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr, which is it's set in 1920, I believe, and it's the story. It's quite a short book, essentially a novella, and it's the story of how a young man who'd fought in the First World War and who'd been quite damaged by that experience, and it's about his experiences over the sort of a summer while he restores a very old painting in a church. And I first read that during a sort of really difficult period in my life when I wasn't sure what was going to happen next. And that was a book that gave me a lot of strength to go on. It gave me a sort of framework and ideas to sort of focus on, and gave me some hope. And it gave me a lot of hope, actually, about overcoming some quite difficult circumstances. And it's something that, again, every time I sort of look at that on the bookcase, as I sort of walk past it, it reminds me that, I have overcome some very difficult things, and I can probably overcome whatever difficult things are coming next. And it's a very lovely gentle story with a lot of poignant moments in it. So I do recommend it to anyone who's watching this.
Yes, I might look into it too. If you could have 3 people over for dinner, who would that be?
So I've always wanted to have met Winston Churchill. So I think he is someone I think is a sort of a fascinating figure, and obviously a dominant one in sort of British sort of political history. I think George Orwell. George Orwell's one of my absolute favourite authors, and wrote, I think, some astonishing sort of literature and articles. And I'd love to meet him. And then I think my grandma, who passed away many years ago. So if I could see her again and have a meal with her, that would be something that would be utterly lovely. And I think the 3 of them would probably have quite a tempestuous conversation. So I'd love to be a part of that.
Fabulous. A very important question: main course or dessert?
Desserts, like, all the time. So.
Definitely. And if you could have a superpower, what would it be?
I think it'd be the ability to make anyone do what I wanted at any time, because surely that's got to be the best superpower ever, because then you can just make things happen and turn bad situations into good situations, and stop people harming others. So I think that would be my superpower.
Brilliant. So that's the end of the rapid fire questions. I'm now going to move on to the career questions.
Mm-hmm.
And my first question is, can you talk our members through about how you go about applying for a role? Mm-hmm. Any hints and tips on the written application or the interview that you can share with them?
Okay, so I think when I'm applying for a role, the first thing is to have a good think about what I want to do next. When I'm coming sort of the end of any particular job, I usually sort of reflect on sort of where I am in terms of my life, and I think about predominantly, first of all, what do I want to do at home and actually beyond work, and what's my sort of what sort of work-life balance am I looking for, and do I want to do things like international travel or domestic travel or not, and what's the sort of framework and platform at home. I think the next thing is to look and think, well, where can I go that's going to have some good development for me? So I don't like being bored. So I like to go and learn and meet new people, work on new issues, tackle some really crunchy problems. So those things sort of feed into my sort of job seeking approach. And then I sort of use my networks. So I know a lot of people. I think one of the benefits I've had probably from having a disability in a wheelchair user is there's not many people who I've certainly come across who sort of look like me in the bits of the civil service I've been in. So I'm quite recognisable, which is good, because then people remember me, and I think it is sometimes a useful tool to build relationships and make connections. So I sort of use my network to identify organisations or maybe roles that are coming up that might be suitable. And sometimes I also think about what are the sort of big sort of policy issues or the big sort of issues in the world that I might want to get involved in and work on. And that was one of the reasons I moved to the Food Standards Agency, because I could see they had a lot of work on Brexit, and I was very keen to be involved in that. And also because it's an issue, everyone eats and drinks, so I wanted to be part of something that was really affecting every person in the country. I think, and then sort of how I approach. I think the rest of the question was it around sort of how I would approach the written application, and then
written application and interview.
So I think my advice, or my experience of written applications is, first of all, don't start only doing it when you found a job that you want to apply for, because composing a really good written application can take quite a bit of time, and that's normally at the time when you can be quite busy at home or at work, or just doing other things. So don't rush it. So what I tend to do is about once a fortnight or once a month, I'll just spend maybe 10, 15 minutes sort of going through the work that I've done recently and the activities and picking out things that either I'm sort of proud of, that I'd want to record on a CV or on a future, statement, or things that I've done that I think have really added some value, and just jot down some bullet points, or move some emails to a folder which I can have as some evidence later on, or get a bit of feedback from people about things. So it's like an ongoing process. So that means that when I come to sort of apply for something, I've got a really good evidence base already there. So that's something that I've certainly learned over the years to be really helpful. I think the other point is, as I say, making the time to sit down and think things through. And I think there's a few stages to that. Is looking at the job application and what it actually, the job specification, what it actually wants, which I know perhaps sounds very obvious. But there's usually quite a lot of time goes into selecting what the criteria are and the behaviours. So thinking actually, what are they looking for in this job? How do I meet it? What else could they be looking for that they can't put on the phone? What's the context in the organisation or the policy area, and using my sort of networks to sort of gather some information for that. And then I think in terms of approaching on a written application, in particular for really senior roles, I think it's about looking at what is the impact of what I have done, in terms of impact on the public good, on citizens, on businesses, on the UK sort of reputation, and then looking at how I got there, what were the actions that I put in. So what's my really clear role, where I provided leadership, or I steered something, or I negotiated something, and really being sort of absolutely crystal clear on that. I think, and also sharing, when one has a draft, sharing it with other people to get their feedback, and sharing it with people who are not just going to go, yeah, that's really great, thank you, but actually really give some proactive feedback and go, what does this really mean? I'm not sure that's right. Have you framed that in the right way? So getting some good sort of quality feedback, and then an obvious point, and I've sifted for quite a lot of sort of senior roles, is just check the spelling and the grammar and the punctuation are right. I do used to find it sometimes astonishing, some paper I get, and it just looks like it's sort of been written and then never sort of checked or read through. So I think that's really important. And I think after that is look for jobs and then apply. So test that paperwork out, put it in, see if you can get selected, see if you can get sifted, and sort of get some feedback. And then turning to the interview, again, and I think for sort of more senior roles, I think there's a lot here about practice. So, build into a rhythm and a schedule, having some mock interviews with people, but also just getting to, I think, the habit of talking about yourself, and what you've done, how you've done it, those sorts of things. From my experience at interviews, where people perform well, is that they know their story, they know their narrative, they know the detail of what they've done, the real, why something was difficult, what the specific challenges were, and their individual role in overcoming that. And that's really important, and it needs to show a sense of like a real scale of challenge that they've overcome, and not be too sort of processy or too processional. I think again as well for senior roles, a couple of bits of advice I would say is, I think everyone will probably be familiar with the STAR format, but actually supplement that with what you learned through the process. So reflecting back what worked well and you would do again, but maybe what didn't work well and how you would change that. And then I think a key thing is then how you transfer that into that role of that organization. So if you've dealt with however many difficult stakeholders, you've learned you've delivered all the results, or delivered whatever results that you delivered, what you've learned from it, and then go, but actually doing some thinking, going, and in this role, you've got stakeholders in X and Y group or location. And actually, I think, and saying things like, well, I could manage those relationships, or I could, add some value there. So that's really, I think, taking it up a level. And probably finally, I think I certainly noticed this for SCS jobs when I was applying for them, is a strong expectation of actually having some insight and understanding of the work of the department, and what the sort of issues are. Now, clearly that's easier if you're in the department, but I've been promoted twice into departments I've never worked in. So it's clearly, you don't have to be in those departments, but I think understand, what that department is going through, what the key issues are, and this can be done anyways, read what's on gov.uk, look at things like maybe 1 or 2 national audit reports and in that policy area, and develop thoughts about what that would, what is going on, have some opinions on that, because that's something that could well be tested at the interview.
That's really interesting. I think that's going to be really helpful for our members, because I imagine that people see the job and that triggers all the action that you've set out. Whereas what you're saying is, no, you need to start doing all the groundwork before you find this job that's, the one that you really want to apply for. And that's really interesting to hear in relation to your experiences.
I mean, if I may so it was almost 2 years to the day between when I decided that I definitely wanted to become an SCS to actually then securing a job. So it was, not a short period of time. And I applied for 13 deputy director jobs, had, I think, 3 or 4 interviews. The rest of them, I just didn't pass the sift before I secured a substantive promotion. So obviously some of that was sort of bunched up over the 2 years, and I had a sort of cluster of applications at the start, some in the middle, and then some at the end. But it was a lot of effort. I think I clocked it at something around about 500-600 hours of time that I'd spent in terms of gathering my evidence, testing it, preparing for interviews, going to interviews, and getting feedback and that sort of stuff. So obviously some people do it a lot quicker, some people take a bit more time, but it was a big investment of time, and obviously not the sort of thing one can just, I don't think anyways, just sort of turn on, apply for a job and then go.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned quite a lot of tips there for our members. Are there any other tips that you want to share with our members, either generally or specific to anyone with a disability?
So I think, for a disability, I think sort of if you're comfortable doing this, be proactive about it. So and sort of recognize for your disability, recognize the positives that you get from that situation, or whatever situation that you're in. So be that insight into people with health challenges and disabilities, be it increased levels of sort of empathy, be it just frankly you've got a bigger network than some people may have through either being part of a staff with disabilities network in your department, or obviously an excellent network like the Reach sort of network, and how you may have contributed to some sort of programs and interventions within your organisation. I think be clear as well about what you sort of need to develop an equitable playing field, but also things of what you want as a person. So regardless of your disability or health sort of status. So I think get that sort of narrative and your requirements clear in your head, and don't be shy of articulating them. I think it's also sort of seek support from your friends and colleagues for this. Job hunting can be quite a lonely process. It can be quite also at times be quite sort of soul destroying. Very few people enjoy rejection, and almost everyone has got some rejections at some point. So have those sort of support networks that are there, and I think also take advantage of opportunities for either coaching, mentoring, sponsorship, be it through a very formal sort of program, something like the Positive Action Pathway or the Future Leaders Scheme, or Delta, or something like that, or just from colleagues who are willing to spend some time to help sort of shape shape what you what you could become as a person. And then I think it's useful sort of once you get offered a job as to go, I've always found this helpful to go and sort of visit the building and the site and get a sense about sort of how it would work, what it would look like, what the sort of day-to-day things are, building up a picture as well about what sort of support processes are there. Is there a sort of staff network? Is there a, what's the sort of cultural supportive sort of systems that are there, and how they can help you transition into a more senior role.
Okay, thank you for that. So for my next question, I'd like you to look back on your career, and hindsight is a great thing. Is there anything that you would have done differently had you had the benefit of hindsight?
Yes, there's loads of things I'd have done differently. It's a short answer. So I suppose absolutely loads. I think I'd pick out sort of two or three here. I think I wished I'd been a bit more open-minded when I was younger about the sort of range of opportunities that the civil service can have. I think I was very focused on doing sort of particular jobs and particular sort of lines of sort of work or working on particular issues when I was sort of younger. And I was at times, and I'm slightly embarrassed to say this, but times perhaps slightly dismissive of some other areas, which I shouldn't have been. And I've now sort of matured and broadened my focus and done that. So I think with the benefit of hindsight, I should have sort of looked at other areas sort of earlier. I think the other thing I did was when I first got promoted to grade 7, I was in a job there for 4 years, and I loved it. It was a very fascinating, interesting job with a great team. But I sort of took my eye off the ball career-wise, and I didn't really do any thinking until I was just about ready to leave about what could come next and what I got out of this job and what the sort of pathways from that job could be to other things. And I'd sort of neglected things a bit like my sort of networks within some areas of the civil service and my sort of wider sort of professional, perhaps leadership development. So I've taken steps since then to rectify that. But that was, I think that was a sort of transitional time in becoming a grade 7. And I would have, if I had my time again, I would have certainly addressed those things. And then I think overall, sometimes I probably just worked a bit too hard, and I should have given myself a bit of a break and gone, actually, you can go out now and go for a walk in the park or go to the pub or go and have a meal or just go home and do nothing. At times I didn't quite get the balance between my priorities at home and my priorities to myself and my work right. So I'd go back and adjust that a little bit, I think, now.
Thank you. You mentioned earlier on that you made, I think, is it 12 or 13 applications for SES? So those are, if you like, setbacks. How did you deal with that setback? How did you recover from it? And generally, if you have any sort of setback, how do you sort of come back from it?
Okay, so on the applications, I mean, I think I'll be completely sort of blunt here. I found it very, very frustrating when I would sort of apply for a job. I'd spend, probably most of a weekend, getting my evidence absolutely sort of really sharp for it and tweaking my CV and my statement of suitability, maybe reading things about the job, using my networks, putting that in, and then just getting a sort of automated message back, which was, I'm sorry, you haven't met the required standard. And that was it. And that happened to me, it was 7, 8 times, 7, 8, 9 times. It was so very, very galling. That's very galling. I'm currently on the Future Leaders scheme, and it took me 4 goes to get on that. So that's so I don't know whether I had obviously previous setbacks where I wasn't selected for for differing reasons. I think my sort of how I approach those things, I think first of all, it's legitimate to feel disappointed and annoyed and frustrated and sometimes a bit angry. So I think for my sort of my approach has been just acknowledge that sometimes I need to spend a few days just allowing my emotions to sort of flow and get it out my system and process that. But then it's sort of picking myself up and going, okay, right, it's on to the next thing. What do I do? So in the case of a job, right, can I get any feedback from that process? If I can, great. If I can't, then I can't. And then move on to sort of future applications. Things like the talent for the FLS. And what I did was get feedback each time about what I could have done differently, or did some self-reflection about how I could have managed it sort of differently at different stages of the process. And then for me, certainly just finding the time to go, right, I need to now put that behind me and be future focused. And there was a colleague who, unfortunately, I cannot remember her name, which is a shame because I'd love to attribute this to her. But she said something utterly profound to me many years ago, and said, your value and your worth is not determined by your last bit of feedback or your last sort of rejection for something, or the last thing that didn't go well. Your purpose, your self-worth is far, far more than that, and should be based on far more pieces of evidence. So while at the time it may seem quite crushing and quite frustrating and negative, actually it should only be, most of those things should, if you can treat them as a sort of isolated incident, that's generally quite helpful. And then I think if there are periods where, certainly I found I'd had a cluster of applications going for DD, which I hadn't been successful in. And one of the best things I did was I took a pause. I decided I'm not going to apply for anything else for 2 months. I'll actually just turn off my civil service job alerts. I won't do anything, and I'm just going to go and get my weekends back and spend time with my wife and do things and that are not job applications. And I did that. I felt a lot better, sort of physically and sort of mentally, as a result of doing that. And when I sort of re-engaged and turned the alerts back on, a few days later, a job popped up, which I thought, that looks very interesting. And then I applied, and that's ended up being the job that I'm doing sort of now. So I think sometimes you've just got to give yourself a bit of a break and then re-engage when you feel right, and then the right thing can come along at that time.
That's really great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And that advice that you got, that was really profound. It's certainly it's made an impact on me in terms of how I see things like that. Can you tell me about one particular civil service initiative for disabled staff that has either helped you progress your career or you think would help others to progress their careers?
So, as I said, I'm currently on the Future Leaders scheme, and part of that is a scheme called Delta, which is now in its first year, and this is for people on the Future Leaders scheme who have disabilities or health conditions. And there's about 35 people on it at the moment, and it's been running for about 15 months, and it is absolutely excellent. Absolutely excellent. So on that, I've got a peer group of, say, about 35 people, and they're just a fantastic group of people. They are extremely lovely, just nice, warm human beings, very compassionate, very caring about each other, very interested in each other. We've got, I think, the most active WhatsApp group I've ever been a part of, and people have really supported each other about everything from going for jobs, life-changing events like having a child or sort of moving house, and it's been hugely helpful during the current lockdown arrangements. Some members are shielding, some members have had sort of other quite big changes, so people are just sharing that experience. I think from Delta, I've had through my colleagues on that and my peers, insight into different disabilities, different health conditions, just different life circumstances, which has really made me sort of broaden my understanding and my knowledge, and think about, my situation, how I can work with people in different situations, what makes an effective, and fair and equal environment. Also, there's people there from, I would guess, probably 15, 20 departments. So it's a great networking to, if I need to find someone in, I don't know, DFT, or I need to find someone in the Treasury, I can just put it into that group, and someone will either be in that department or will know someone who is. So it's a fantastic thing for building a network. I got some really profound advice from a colleague called Mark. So Mark, if you ever watch this, thank you, about in applying for my DD job. So some really expert advice and help and support. And then the actual formal learning interventions are very, very good as well. So we've had 3 sort of workshops so far. There's some excellent coaching that's been delivered by a consultancy called, I think it's Results CIC, and the people on that have got disabilities themselves. So it's really getting that leadership coaching and development, but with a real focus about what it means for you as a person with a disability or a health condition. So it's really sort of bespoke, high quality stuff, and I cannot praise it highly enough. So I encourage, if this is obviously accessible to grade 7s and grade 6s via the FLS. So my strong advice would be, apply for the FLS. The FLS is a good program, but if you get on it, definitely opt to go on the Delta program because it is superb.
Thank you for sharing that. Who would you say is your biggest supporter, and who is your role model?
So I think my wife is my biggest supporter, who she's always cheering me on and looking after me when perhaps I fall down, sometimes metaphorically, sometimes literally, and is there looking after me of everything from, some great emotional support, sort of physical support, and we've been together now for about 8 years, and she's completely sort of reset my views on a number of things, and maybe just take a much sort of broader, a more thoughtful perspective on things. So I think she's definitely my sort of biggest supporter. In terms of role models, frankly, I don't have a single person who's a role model. There's no sort of person I can think of. I go, that is my role model. I tend to sort of have a bit of a composite one where I take things from different people, and go, I like, how X does that or how Y does that. And sort of something I've done over the years, I've created a sort of, as it were, like a sort of leadership, I call it like a sort of leadership scarecrow. So I've got a little drawing, which is just like a sort of straw, like a sort of stick man. That was it, the leadership stick man. And when I've sort of observed people who work with people, and I've seen stuff I really like, I've sort of just written a few notes down about that and gone, I love the way X did that or Y did that. And I sort of kept that. And then I use that and I look and I think about my own leadership presence and what I do. And I sort of think, well, is that what that person would do? Is that what you and Stuart, who I work for on HMRC, would do? And he was, his passion for the work was more than almost anyone I'd seen. In terms of his enthusiasm for for equality, is that what Charlotte would do? Those sort of people. It's that sort of real life experience that I found each other. So sort of together they form my sort of composite role model, but it's made up of many parts of many people.
Yeah, and that's certainly an interesting way and probably a more effective way because you then get different contributions from different people. So that's really good. Given the current circumstances that we find ourselves in currently, I'd like to ask you some questions around working from home during COVID-19. You mentioned earlier on that it's been, is it a couple of months now, I think, that we are working more remotely. How has that been for you?
So it's been quite mixed, I would say, for me. So I've been, I think this is week 11 now where I've been working from home. And I've only been into the office, I think 3 times in that period. Just once for a meeting, one for a call that I couldn't do from home, and once for another purpose. I found it quite challenging. So actually, let's take the positives first. What I've enjoyed not having to commute every day. That saved me 2 hours, which has been fantastic. And I've got 2 hours to to focus on other things. I think it has made me where I live. It's made me explore, less ability to go sort of out and about. And again, I'm sort of referencing the Delta sort of program. It's made me really listen and think about friends and colleagues around the civil service and a bit beyond about their experiences. And I think one of the most fascinating and sort of troubling things about it has been the sort of definitions around vulnerability and risk. And actually who is vulnerable and who is at risk. And I think it's often, can be quite broad and, requires quite a lot of nuance. I think the sort of, but I think some of the challenges I've found, I think I mentioned earlier on, I'm quite extrovert in terms of my thinking and my approach. So I like being around people. I like sort of having their energy around me. And I haven't had that. So that is hard. That has been hard. It continues to be hard. And I'm sure it will continue to be hard for quite some time. And I miss the sort of social atmospherics and things I could do at work, such as go for a coffee with someone face to face, and go to maybe at the pub afterwards or go out for a meal. That's really tough. And I think the other thing is tough is being in front of a screen sort of all day for perhaps 11 hours a day. And there's that incessant sort of emails and Teams messages, and there's not as many sort of natural breaks perhaps in the day than there are in the office. So I think in terms of obviously as however the situation progresses, I will be need to give thought about what my sort of future career looks like in terms of times at home, sort of times in the office, and I'm very mindful of many people are in far worse situations, far more challenging situations. But in my role as a leader, part of it, and for my teams, is to sort of, listen to them, understand what's going on. Where can I help? Where can others help? What are the interventions that can be put in place? Be it, having a more regular one-to-one, talking about how we're feeling at teams meetings, and getting a sense of, what's the practical things that we can do.
Yeah, brilliant. So if our Zoom camera was to go around your home office, what would be the most unexpected thing that we would find?
So there's a sort of 5-foot stuffed giant bunny sitting on one of our sofas that my wife bought a few years ago from a shop. And she's now sort of, as I'm looking there, he's just sort of sitting on the sofa. So I can always remember I was sitting in the car, just sort of, I was looking at something on my phone. And I looked up to see a sort of happy smiling face as she sort of wheeled this along, and I just remember sort of smiling and laughing. So yeah, I think most people, if they knew me, wouldn't expect me to have a sort of 5-foot giant stuffed sort of bunny on the sofa at home, but there it is. Yeah, I think that's probably the most unexpected thing.
That's definitely unexpected. I don't think you can beat that one. You mentioned earlier on about the positives and the negatives about working remotely. Would you say personally it's made life easier or harder for you, or it's made no difference?
I think overall it has made life harder, bluntly. I think it's harder for me it's harder for me emotionally, because I just miss being around people physically and having that sort of interaction in the office. It's made it harder. It's a much bigger leadership challenge, I think, to lead and manage a team. I think I've been part of a leadership team creating essentially a sort of new directorate in my organisation. Now that's hard at the best of times. It's very hard when it's at this sort of pace of work, and it's very hard when of the sort of 250 people in it are in 250 separate locations, and I can't travel around and see them. So that's been incredibly difficult. We've overcome a huge amount of those challenges and delivered some really fantastic results, but that's required a lot of sort of bandwidth in my mind to be able to do that. And I think so yeah, I think overall it's been harder, and I am now sort of gearing myself up for what the next few months could look like. It's been sort of three months almost so far. It's clearly going to be not all over next week. So what do the next few months look like, and what I need to do, and what I need to do with my teams and my people, and how we all sort of work together to get everyone through this.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that you have found it challenging, and it has been difficult. Are there any tips that you could share with our members on how to make working remotely work for them?
So the first thing I'd say is, obviously I recognise some people will love working sort of remotely, and it can be a really great thing to do. And I think I should say, just a sort of context, I enjoy it generally. I think it's just all of the time that I'm finding it now, it's harder. I think certainly when I was in the Food Standards Agency, I used to work from home about 2 days a week and have 3 days in the office. And I think that was the sort of perfect balance sort of problem for me. In terms of sort of tips about it, I think I'll share from my experience. So if you have a sort of chair, if you have a sort of a specific chair at work, if your organisation have that sent to you, do it. I was on the sort of in MHCLG about 2 days after the sort of everyone must work from home if they can announcement came in. I contacted our head of sort of HR for diversity and inclusion and said, well, what can be done about getting people's chairs and equipment and desks to their homes, because I think this is going to be very important. And I was really pleased to see the response that went, yeah, we completely agree, we're getting on with this. And a process was in place, I think, within 72 hours. And I know within, I think, 5 days, my chair arrived. So that was, I thought, was an incredible sort of delivery at pace, supporting people. Other equipment sort of been provided. So I think make sure you have the right equipment. get a suitable chair, if you have the opportunity to get a suitable desk, if you have the opportunity to get a monitor. I think I found that quite helpful in terms of having something that isn't just a sort of quite small screen to work on. So I think there's the equipment. I think the next thing is, obviously, I presume there'll be a whole range of folk sort of watching this in different jobs in different situations. I think there is something there about building in communication is so important. So I think within teams, building in opportunities to talk to each other, and not just about the latest commission or bit of work or deadline, but actually trying to mirror, hopefully, the sort of social interaction that people, may have had in the office. So I think that is, I think that can be particularly important. So, whether it's a pub quiz, whether it's bingo, with my sort of home team, we're just about to start having like a team lunch once a week where we used to do in the office, but we'll just sit around and, eat our, sort of chicken and hula hoop sandwiches and eat a banana or, whatever it is, other foods are available. And just sort of chat about, how things are going. I ran with my old team a virtual dinner party a few weeks ago where I chunked everybody up into courses, and then we switched the groups around between different courses, and then had some drinks afterwards. And that was great just to get people sort of mixing together. And I think also get advice from people who already homework and what works for them, what not. So again, to go back to my sort of Delta group, there are people who I work with who are who already work at home and have worked at home for 5 years. So I've sought their advice about what works for them, what have they found helpful and not helpful. Yeah, I think that's really important. And if anyone is watching this and this has been a really big transition, I think you sort of recognise and own that and go, we are living through an extraordinary period in history, an extraordinary period of sort of personal challenge for so many people. So I think it is important to recognise that, recognise there can be a range of feelings in a day, some of them extremely powerful, and get those, sort of understand those, share those, talk to your sort of line manager about it. And don't sort of share the successes and share the good things if you can, but share the problems and don't shy away from them. I think there's been some astounding sort of bravery and courage shown by so many people, but the most courageous thing is often to go, actually, this is something that I'm really struggling with and I need some help. And I did that with my director a few weeks ago, and I had quite a long conversation with her about some of the things that I was finding hard. And I've done that with some of my, deputy director colleagues, and we've all found it of value. We've come up with some sort of solutions. Some things remain a challenge, but don't suffer in silence and share the experience.
Those are really good tips. Thank you for sharing those. In general, how would you say that lockdown is affecting people with disabilities?
So I think it is really varied. I think the experience is sort of hugely varied. I think I've seen some positives of people saying that it's opening up opportunities in their work for them, be it people who've already got perhaps existing jobs and they can now work from home without having to commute regularly, and that's freeing up some of their time and their energy and their perspective. I think also for some colleagues who perhaps because of a disability or health condition might work at home a lot or all of the time, I think it now is much more of a level playing field than it ever was before. So I think the sort of having 90% of people in the office and 10% outside the office, clearly that's now very different for most of the civil, or a lot of the civil service. So I think that's putting people on a bit more of a level playing field. And so I think those are some positives. I think, but clearly there are negatives. I know 4 people who are shielding, and that's really challenging for them for all of the the obvious reasons of an inability to go outside, but also the sort of severing of just normal daily life and the ability to go to the shop or the ability to go to the pub or the ability to see their loved ones and their families. And that must just be an extraordinary challenge to do that. I'm fortunate that I can go outside and enjoy the fresh air and go to Sainsbury's. Other supermarkets are available. And do those things, and it just must it must be incredibly difficult for people who aren't. I think one of the good things that I'm seeing is I think there is perhaps a bit more conversation between colleagues with disabilities and health conditions about what's going on, and how they're feeling, and what can be done. And I'm starting to see a bit of the dialogue now turning into like, what is the long-term sort of approach to this? Things like, can we be more flexible about having roles that are based at home and away from London, or indeed major cities, about flexible working. So I think one of the great things, certainly in my area, have been quite a lot of people have childcare commitments. So we've had quite a lot of flexibility on hours, where people say, well, I can do 2 hours here, but then I need a break for 2 hours to look after my children while their partner does their 2 hours at their job, and vice versa. And I think, and we've managed to deliver a massive national response to a pandemic, while being flexible about those things. So I think we can probably maintain some of that flexibility when we go back into or we go into whatever the new normal is, and giving people those opportunities for breaks, and to do things sort of differently. And I think also as well, on a personal level, I've sort of shared some of my experiences, people when they've sort of grumbled about transport or shops and those sort of things, and access arrangements and doing things differently. And I've shared a bit of my sort of personal experience of some of the challenges I've found over the years of being out and about. They're not obviously quite the same as people are facing now. But I think, some to say people with disabilities and health conditions are being sought out, or some people are being sought out for a voice to inform, what will happen, what's going to happen in the future.
That's really useful. Thank you for sharing that. My final question, you'll be pleased to hear. What is the one most important thing you would want to leave with us today?
So obviously there can be a whole range of people watching this video at different times, different life situations, different professional backgrounds, and all those sorts of things. So I'm sure that and whatever sort of disability or health condition or multiple conditions that you're sort of facing, I think a bit of sort of an observation I would make is, if you're thinking of going for a senior role, senior roles, then give it a go. In one sense, what have you got to lose? Even if you do an application, it doesn't go anywhere. You've invested a bit of time and effort in writing that application, and that's it. You've probably learned a bit of reflecting back on your performance, and that's always useful for things like annual, sort of performance and development reviews, or thinking about identifying a development need. And actually, you might get the interview, and then you've got some interview practice, and you can do that. And actually, you might get the job, and then you could go off and be, completely brilliant at that, and then, go off and help, change the world and make it a bit of a better place. So I think overall, I'd say, give things a go, try them out, recognise that you're probably not going to have success every time, but not achieving that is a way to learn. Some people I know a few years ago used to say, we never had failures, we just had deferred successes, which I thought was quite a good way of looking at it. And then taking that learning from those different stages and building it towards it. And that's why I'm really keen when I talk about my sort of journey from quite a junior grade into the SCS, to sort of talk about some of the realities of it and go, I had to try 13 applications before I got promoted from grade 6 to DD. It took me 18 applications to go from grade 7 to grade 6. So, you may do it in less, you may do it in more. There's a lot that goes into building to this, but, take the first step, apply, get some words down on paper, go and network with people, do those things.
Stuart, that's been absolutely amazing to hear about your personal journey, to hear about your reflections on how you would have done things differently with the benefit of hindsight. And the tips that you have shared have been really useful, really helpful. And thank you so much for being so open and candid in your responses. I think a lot of what you have said, I'm sure, will resonate with a lot of staff, including people with disabilities. And not only that, I think it will genuinely be very helpful to people who are thinking about or are in the process of progressing their careers and moving into senior grades. I think they'll find that really, really useful. So thank you so much for doing that.